Cool. So, well, thank you very much. Let's kick off because it is 12 o'clock. I do want to respect your time. Thank you for joining us. My name is Cliff Morgan. Most of you who have registered for this should know me. You're in my world. I am a leadership expert, organizational psychologist, and really, I love helping leaders get the most out of their people at work. It is going to be an interactive webinar today. Just a few of us here online live, so please engage in the chat. I've got the chat open. I'll be responding to any questions that you have. Feel free to jump off mute and ask the question in person, I guess, as well, if that's what you would like to do. I wanted to start by telling a bit of a story, and it's a real story. It happened to a friend of mine recently. They quit their job, and they quit their job because of a terrible performance review. Now, it wasn't that his performance that was subject to review was terrible. It's that the way the conversation was had, the performance review itself and how it was conducted was absolutely terrible. Here's what happened. He walked into the room open to hearing how he could improve his performance. He was he's a good quality worker, absolutely loves feedback, so really open to hearing how he could improve. And he sat down expecting that this is going to go pretty smoothly and pretty well, because he'd had no indication that he wasn't performing or any feedback that would indicate he wasn't meeting expectations. However, he was absolutely blindsided by his manager. And they started with a long list of areas that he was underperforming in or expectations that he weren't being met. This list had been kept right throughout the year, but he'd never been told about any of it. And he was really disappointed because he could have addressed all those things and really wanted to, make the most of his time at work and perform and achieve as much as possible. And he just didn't feel like he had the opportunity. Now, this individual was then put on a performance management plan, and his manager said that within a very short period of time, he acknowledged he was making significant improvements and meeting all these expectations now that he knew what they were. But the damage was already done and the trust was broken. And as a result, he quit, he resigned, and he left. And it was a big loss for the organization. It was a big loss because he was a great employee, very loyal, and all of that was the result of a poor performance conversation. All right. And so what I want to do today is make sure that I can help you avoid those scenarios in your workplace with your organization. So welcome, Glenn, Sarah, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us. Michaela, great for you to jump in. As I mentioned before earlier, it's going to be interactive. So please put your comments in the chat throughout the day. If you've got questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be responding to those. Or feel free to jump off mute at an appropriate point and ask those questions if you would prefer. So I want to kind of encourage that right from the beginning here. And I want to say, when you have performance conversation and I say those words, what comes to mind for you? Put it in the chat right now. All right. So as you guys are thinking about that and typing it, really today, what we're trying to do is maximize employee performance, giving you strategies for productive performance conversations. Really what I want to help you do is get the best return on investment for the conversations that you have, the best ROI. Okay. And Daniel, thanks. He's saying alignment on expectations and objectives. Yeah. One of the big key things is making sure that when we'll cover it as we go throughout, is making sure that people are clear, making sure that they are aligned on what is expected of them. Okay. And So Sarah's saying key KPIs, behavioral discussions. Yes, very much. It's not just saying here's what we need to do, but here's the behaviors that are expected as well. The more specific you are around that, the more meaningful the conversations become. Glenn's saying review of performance, goal setting, and training for the next year. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to do that. One of the things that I want everybody to understand is it's not just about performance reviews. Yeah, Peter's saying no surprises. Growth goals from Sarah. Yeah, 100%. All of these are absolutely key. Performance conversations, they need to be more than just the performance review. Because when you think about it, you got to think about what's the purpose of a performance review, right? And what you don't want is this kind of case, right? I got a text message from your boss, keep up work. There's your performance review, all right? A bit of a laugh for Glenn. I know you love a good Dilbert comic. And so there's one to start off. But you got to think, what's the purpose of a performance review? Well, their origin dates back to even before World War I in the military. And the purpose for the performance review was for an officer or a military leader to provide feedback to the hierarchy within the military as to who would be suitable for promotion if that individual officer or leader was killed in battle. So originally, the whole purpose of performance reviews was not to provide feedback to the actual performing members. All right. And so when we think about that, but over time, it has obviously the individual members have been kind of brought in and incorporated. But that and what I would say is that people often, or leaders and managers, they associate performance reviews with performance conversations. But performance conversations really need to be happening so much more regularly than just an annual review. Yes, you can use them for goal setting. They're a great opportunity to provide feedback, but really that feedback and those performance conversations need to be happening so much wider than that one meeting each year, right? And really, we've got to think about, well, what is the purpose of a performance conversation? We're talking broader than just the review. But so we're talking about formal conversations, informal conversations. We'll talk a little bit about what that might look like as we move on. But you got to think about what's the purpose of having a performance review. They are the performance conversation. They are the primary mechanism for driving performance within your business. Yes, you can have rewards. Yes, you can have job descriptions and what's expected of people. And these are all really important things. But it's actually having the conversation and saying, hey, you are performing, or hey, you're not, and this is what you need to do. That's what drives performance in your business. And it's really important, if you're going to do this well, that it's all about, the focus is about progress, not punishment. What you want to do is generate growth and development in the performance of the individual, not just give a grilling about not meeting expectations. And if you're going to do it well, yes, there may be some corrective feedback that you're giving in these conversations, but at the same time, they need to be reinforcing feedback. They need to be encouraging and supportive and appreciative as well, right? It should be this balance of, hey, yes, this is where you need to improve, but this is, we're on board with you, we're supporting you. You don't have to do it all on your own. So I want you to think of the best performance conversation that you've had with a leader, or a leader has had with you, and what made it so good. I want you to put that in the chat. All right. I think for me, some of the best conversations that I've had around my own performance were short and concise, but I walked away with absolute clarity. Right. And really the best ones, I think, were probably a series of conversations. They weren't just a one-off. I can think of a particular time in the military where there was 3 conversations over a week. and I was 100% clear on what I needed to do. I felt supported in that, and it was absolutely, needed. It gave me what I needed to hit the goals that were set before me by my leadership. Sarah's saying career planning, supporting your own goals. So yeah, that autonomy in terms of your ability to input into the goal setting is really important. Thanks, Sarah. And that's Sarah Lancelot. Sarah Rafael, she says recognition for you as a whole person. Life outside of work is just as important. And really interesting, I heard just this week, Sarah, that there's a company over in I believe it's UAE, it's in the Middle East somewhere, and their managers are keeping track of their staff's goals outside of work. And one of the managers' performance indicators is how much their staff are able to progress towards or achieve those goals outside of work. So managers are being held accountable for what staff are doing or how much staff achieve outside of work. A really interesting concept around encouraging work-life balance there. Daniel's saying best conversations I've had, really confirming what does good look like. Yeah. And who owns and controls the opportunity to influence and change. Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. I think one of the key things to walk away from here today is clarity is so important, right? One of the things that I will say is that we need to lay the foundations before we can have really effective performance conversations. See, these conversations aren't just happening in isolation, all right? They are part of the broader work life that we have. And if we're going to have effective performance conversations, we have to first set the conditions to have those conversations. And so I want to spend a little bit of time just now. What are some of the foundations that we can establish and lay to be able to set those conditions? All right. And some of these may sound really simple. They may sound really basic, but I always draw back to something my first commanding officer had in the Air Force. And he used to say that what separates the special forces from regular troops is not different tactics or different weapons. They use the same tactics and weapons as conventional troops, but they are brilliant at the basics. They execute those foundational principles flawlessly, and that's what makes them so good. And I think the same concept here is for leaders. It's the leaders who execute the foundations really well are those that step above into that high performance space, high performing leaders. You see here this quote that I absolutely love. What is described as elite performance is mostly just the fundamentals taken to the limits of their vast potential. I think that is so good. You can do some of the fundamental things and you can do them, well, and they'll, be beneficial in your workplace. You take them to to the next step, to the limits of their potential, and they absolutely transform some of the relationships, the connections, and ultimately create the conditions for high performance from your team. All right. So a couple of things in the comments here. Is work really the right forum for engaging team members on non-work life? I think it's context dependent, Glenn. I think there are environments and work contexts where that is completely fine. I think sometimes, just the context may mean it's not appropriate, right? At the end of the day, you need to be the expert in your organization and in your world, and you make that decision and call. What I would say is that we do need to build and engage and have positive working relationships. And so often what we need to do, or one of the easiest ways to do that, is take an interest in people, which involves things outside of work. Now, do you go to the extent of being held accountable for what they do outside of work? I think that's, pushing the limits potentially, or in most organizations, that's pushing the limits of what might be expected. But it's an interesting concept to explore, right? And Peter's saying that non-work life is included in my monthly one-on-one. What I think the non-work life included in the workplace does is it gives a leader an understanding of what's going on outside of work. If you think of it's really beneficial for teams to understand what's going on in other teams within the business, so that they can manage workloads and not, pile a bunch of work onto, the classic, right, that's coming to mind is the sales team versus the design team or the production team. If the sales team is just pumping through all these new sales and new leads to be designed, or projects to be designed by a team, but the design team is absolutely swamped and can't deliver on the sales team's promises, then you've got issues within the business. And at the same time, right, if you're in the work and you're trying to pump a whole lot extra work on an individual, but their mother might be sick, or some of the things that are going on, there are some issues going on outside. You can't necessarily, if you're not aware of those, then you can't manage the work side of things to look after the whole individual, right? If you're pumping them full of work and they've got a whole lot of stuff going on outside, then the conditions are not conducive to high performance. So I think there is real merit to including it in. The question is, what does that look like? And that's really the contextual piece. All right. So let's jump into laying some of these foundations that create the conditions for good performance conversations. And the first one is building trust and rapport. Right. There is so much research out there about how high trust relationships between leaders and their members leads to performance. I've got a friend of mine. He says, I'll never give feedback to an individual until I've earned the right to be heard, earned the right to speak into their life and their work. And I think that is a really key principle there. So, I mean, you can think about a new leader, new CEO or something that comes into an organization, just starts making changes and telling people what to do without first understanding what's going on, without first connecting to the people. It really does erode the relationship, or provide a poor start to allow them to speak in, as opposed to someone that actually takes the time to build trust and say, hey, I value you, and here's how you can improve your performance. The people are much more open if there is a connection there, right? When you have good quality relationships, there's and trust, from a neuroscience level, it boosts the oxytocin that is there in trusting relationships that are there, and so people actually feel good about the engagement that's there. But also importantly, what that does is it creates what we call a halo bias. So what it says is that I trust Cliff as a leader. I trust him as a person. I trust his intentions, and therefore I'm going to choose to interpret the performance conversation, right, with the best intent. He's got the best intent. He's got my best interests at heart. I trust him to be having this conversation for my benefit. All of these things are going on both consciously and subconsciously in employees' minds if we have a trusting relationship. If there's no trust there, then the leader may have the best intentions behind the performance conversation, but if it's not nailed, or if there's something ambiguous in there, then the staff member is likely to interpret that negatively. Oh, he's just writing me. He's just being critical. He doesn't want me here, right? And so the interpretation of the conversation is more likely to be less accurate and perceived negatively if there is no trust there, right? The other thing around trust and building those trusting relationships with people is, one, people give greater discretionary effort, right? If I trust you and I like you, then I'm going to give more effort in my work. And obviously that's going to, if people are more motivated, more going to go above and beyond for a particular leader, that's going to translate into greater levels of performance as well. And really it's around getting to know people, because the more you know about a person, the more you can predict what they're going to do in the future, the more you trust them to behave a particular way, right? The more you know about your people, the more levers you have to motivate them, all right? And that becomes really important in terms of framing your performance conversations, because you will come back to it, or we'll come back to it in a little bit. The more you tailor the conversation to the individual, the more likely that conversation is going to resonate with that individual as well. Okay. Cool. And the other piece to all of this, right? I was reading some research just this week, actually, around the positive relationships and trusting relationships. And if an employee has an ambivalent relationship with their boss, then that leads to significantly poorer relationship. It's not just, hey, I need to have a positive relationship. Ambivalence can actually be worse than I actually don't trust my boss. Because if people don't trust their boss, then they're going to be on guard, and they're going to, have kind of this mindset of, I need to perform to keep my boss away from me. Whereas if it's like, oh, I don't really care, it's good, it's not that bad, that's going to translate into their performance as well, and they're not going to really care about their work. And so it's those both extremes that to build the trusting relationship. People go above and beyond, but it's not just about avoiding having a poor or a non-trusting relationship, because a non-trusting relationship can actually lead to higher performance than an ambivalent relationship, right? And so again, just something to keep in the back of your mind. I wanted to say, what are some of the things that you do as a leader in your workplace, or that you've seen done, that build trust and rapport? There are so many different things out there, but I'm keen to hear what you're saying. Dan's saying he really resonates with this. I like to use the method from crucial conversations in creating a shared pool of meaning to frame conversations. Yeah, 100%, right? And again, it's that common ground is one of those things that builds trust. If we take the time and invest our energy in actually getting on the same page to create that shared pool of meaning, then that is like, hey, it's working alongside each other. We're working for the benefit of each other, and that builds trust in and of itself. All right, Glenn's saying clear expectations, clear feedback, and understanding the consequences. Yeah, so the clarity is a big thing. People fear what they do not know, right? And when things aren't clear, all right, there's a whole lot of unknowns around it. And that's, again, it's kind of coming back to this concept of clarity, which you guys keep on talking about and mentioning here, is so important, because what these conversations ultimately do is reduce the number of unknowns. So therefore they're increasing the level of clarity, they're increasing people's confidence rather than increasing their fear in the workplace. Okay, it's kind of a bit of a bow to draw, but that's kind of the follow-on effect, the second, third, fourth order psychological effects of all of this. Sarah's saying you get so much more from someone when they feel safe. I find a psychological safe is high value and highly valued by employees. Yeah, that's 100% right. And if you can make people feel safe, then they trust you, right? They trust you when they feel safe. If you feel threatened, obviously that's going to erode that safety. And that's echoed there by Peter's comments as well. All right, let's move on to that second kind of foundation, which, Here's a famous quote by Robert Kiyosaki as well. Before we move on, you can demand, force, and push people as long as they know you care about them, right? It's also, it brings to mind that quote by Theodore Roosevelt, that people don't know how much people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. All right. And so this one here, clear goals, timeframes, measures of success. Again, kind of this is relating a bit to what you said there, Glenn. People, in order for people to perform, they need to know what performance looks like. They need to know what success looks like. Someone said a little bit earlier about knowing what good looks like. And that's 100% true. You've got to be clear on that. If people are ambiguous, then they're going to not commit fully to their work. They're going to hold back a little bit because, I don't quite know if I'm doing the right thing. Whereas if they have clarity, they can move forward with confidence and commitment, and therefore performance is going to be so much higher. Again, this sounds really basic, but it's so true that so many people that I encounter don't do some of these basics. Literally, just this week, I was speaking to an executive who was struggling with setting some goals for their team. They're literally about to go into some performance reviews and wanted to talk through that process. And they were struggling to identify what would be good goals for my team. And he was really struggling with that because he hadn't really defined what success for the team looked like. And so he couldn't then articulate or what the contribution of each of the team members towards that team success was, and therefore struggling in that space. So unless you define what are the measures of success, what does good look like, and what are we trying to achieve as a team, then it's hard to kind of align the individual goals to this. And this is really the importance of doing this kind of at the higher level, the team or the collective level, or department or organizational level. It really is that alignment piece that we were talking about earlier, because you can set really good and effective goals for individuals, but if they're not aligned to the team goals or the organizational goals, then you're all kind of going off in different directions, and that's not creating the conditions for good performance, right? And it's it's hard to hold people accountable to achieving the business or the team goals if you've helped them set goals that aren't aligned to that, right? And that kind of causes a little bit of confusion, causes a whole lot of well, it erodes those conditions for good performance, is what I would say. All right. Is this making sense to you guys? Is it like, I know it's foundational, I know it's kind of basic, but is it making sense to you? If yes, put a Y in the chat. All right. Sarah's saying yes with an exclamation mark. That's what I want to see. Daniel, thank you. So often it's the case with this stuff that you need to slow it down at the front end and take the time to do it and do it well, so that you can speed up execution at the back end, right? You can speed up the performance conversation. You can speed up the driving of performance at the back end because you've taken the time to set the clarity right up front. All right. Again, we're talking about clarity, but this one's around expectations, right? Are people clear about what you expect of them as they try and achieve their goals? And, I often come back to this. I say that all conflict is a result of unmet expectations, and people can't meet expectations if they don't know what they are, right? I remember one performance review that I had, was the result of a series of conversations. But I remember sitting in this occasion, and we set some pretty clear goals for me. And now those goals were, basically I needed the opportunity to execute on these goals. And it was back in the military, and the goals are irrelevant, but what I had an expectation that my leader was going to bring opportunities to give me opportunities to achieve these goals. Now, my leader's expectation at that point was that I would go and find opportunities to execute on that. And so I sat down for my performance review, and they said, well, hey, you haven't actually done these things that we agreed that you're going to do. And I was talking to him and saying, well, you didn't give me the opportunity to do that. I didn't have the opportunity. And they were expecting me to be proactive and go and find the opportunity, right? And so the clarity of expectation, we had differing expectations around what the execution of that looked like. And so again, if you're not clear on what people aren't clear on what your expectations are of that, then they can't go and do that. They can't meet your expectations. Okay, and so that becomes really important. The final one I want to talk about here in terms of creating the conditions is we need to gain agreement and commitment along the way. And this is one of the things that can really make having a performance conversation and holding people accountable so much easier if you do this step first, right? And so it's saying, hey, here's your goals, these are the expectations. Are you actually happy with this? Are you clear on what needs to happen? Can you commit to this? And again, it seems like really simple questions to ask. And it kind of, if you're having the conversation, then it's kind of an assumed thing. It's an implied, but being really explicit, making the implicit explicit, becomes really important in terms of being able to hold people accountable. Because what you can then say is, well, hey, you actually said, down the track, if they're not performing, they're not meeting expectations, you agreed to this, all right? You actually committed to doing this. And so you're setting yourself up, one, by actually gaining the commitment and agreement. What you're doing is by actually having that conversation, making that explicit, they are more likely to go away and implement. And so you're setting the conditions for them to perform. But if they don't, then it makes your job easier when it comes to holding them accountable, right? So it's a simple step, but it's one that's often overlooked, and it can really lay the foundation for some good conversations in the future. All right, just catching up with the chat here. Glenn saying setting goals and expectations is the easy bit. The hard bit is how do you deal with the consequences of in an employee's market. Yeah, it is so true. This is easy. As I said, this is basic. But if you don't do this, it makes the performance conversations down the track a whole lot harder. All right. And Daniel's saying, yes, he agrees, actions need to be clear and need to be owned. If it's cloudy in the pulpit, it's misty in the pews. I love that comment, Peter. Yeah, that's true. If you're not 100% clear, then you can guarantee that your people aren't 100% clear. And so, one of the things that you can ask yourself before you kind of leave the initial your conversation around goal setting and that sort of thing, is to ask yourself, am I clear on this? All right. And then ask them, are they clear? That becomes really important. So which of these foundations, right, are really important to you, or do you think could be improved in your workplace? Which resonate with you the most? Put that in the chat. The important thing to understand with all of these foundations, right, they are not designed to catch people out. What they do is designed to create the conditions where they perform and meet your expectations, so you don't have to have a performance conversation with them down the track, or the performance conversation you're having is reinforcing it, saying, hey, you're doing a great job, keep it up. Prevention is better than a cure. And so what you want to do with all of these foundations is hopefully create an environment that promotes performance, and then prevents the necessary performance conversation type things. Right? Dan saying trust, everything can be done better from a foundation of trust. 100% agree. And you know what, the scientific research backs that up, Daniel. There is, you know, there's so much out there around the benefits of building trusting relationships, and it is foundational. It's covered in every leadership training and every leadership course, but that's because it is so important. Sarah's saying making the goals, timeframes, and measures of success crystal clear. Yeah, I mean, so often we can have a clear goal, right? And we say we need to increase by this, or we need to implement that. We need to reduce the man hours on this particular project, whatever it is, right? But what does success look like? What are the specific things? How do we know that we've actually achieved that? And it's again, simple step, but one that a lot of people or leaders fail to take. All right. Cool. What do we got here? Transparency. Transparency builds trust. Yeah, 100%. Excuse me. Big fan of being transparent as a leader. And you know, I'm fan in these conversations, as you're laying these foundations, be transparent in what you're doing, and say, well, hey, I just want to make 100% certain that you're clear on what we're doing, you know, clear on the goal, but also I want clear on the expectations around this. So my expectations are, you know, and what expectations do you have of me to support you in order to achieve this goal? Those kind of things, you know, 100% transparency in what you're doing in terms of laying the foundations also really helps here. Okay, Glenn's saying he's lost sound. Mara's saying he's still got it. Glenn, yes, go and talk to Nige about the expectations there. Hopefully your sound will return, which is good. All right, so let's keep moving on here. How do you get the best return on investment for your performance conversations here? So this is actually having the performance conversations. Now, I want to say what this is not is a step-by-step, right? But what I want to do is give you some principles here to get the ROI out of the conversations that you have. And it's a little model here just to kind of see how it all plays in. But ROI, regularity, outcome, and individualize the conversation. Okay, so let's kind of have a bit of a look at that. And the first part here, which is really how I introduced this whole topic, is that regularity is key. What we don't want to do is make sure that we are only relying on an annual performance review to be able to have these conversations. All right. If I jump in here, all right, and we'll use the whiteboard. If this is kind of where the expectations of performance are, and people over time start to deviate from those expectations, right? If you're sitting and having a performance review once a year, you're waiting 12 months before you address it. That deviation of performance is a significant one. And therefore, the conversation that you have becomes much harder. It becomes much bigger. And the effort that staff need to invest in order to correct their performance is so much greater. So much the implications and the impact of poor performance are greater, and all of that, as opposed to if you're having small conversations along the way, people are constantly correcting. All right, the deviations are only small, and therefore you're giving them the greatest chance to perform. If you think back to the story that I told right at the beginning of my friend who got blindsided in his performance review, he'd been left for 12 months without any feedback along the way. And obviously his performance was drastically different to what was expected of him. Now, the impact, as I said, was that the trust was eroded and he ended up leaving the organization despite being a great employee. All right. So again, it needs to be regular performance conversations. So let me just flick back here. Oh. And what we, so that can look different, right? That can be formal one-on-ones that occur. And if you're in an office-based job, my recommendation is weekly or fortnightly, you're having one-on-ones with your direct reports. Who here has one-on-ones in their role, and how often do you have them? Throw that in the chat. One-on-ones are so important. Sarah's saying every month. Peter's saying monthly. Yep. I think a lot of my clients talk about having monthly one-on-ones. Glenn's saying weekly, which is great. If you've got the opportunity to do weekly, I'm a big fan of that. Sometimes not practical in some workplaces. Daniel's saying operation weekly, purpose-driven feedback monthly. Okay, cool. So that is one of the things that that I have seen a number of clients do, and are quite aware of a number of organizations do, in the sense that they have different kind of topics that might be covered, or different focuses for their one-on-ones. But it's time together where there is an opportunity to have a performance-related conversation, right? I've spoken before around leaders need to make the most of the opportunities that come to them, but they also need to create the opportunities to lead as well. And I think having the conversation, having a regular one-on-one, is creating an opportunity for you to discuss performance, to provide feedback, to build connection, and to get to know your people, right? That becomes super important. So if you've got a regular one-on-one, that's kind of a bit more formal, structured way to have those regular performance conversations. Then there's also the informal ones, which is the feedback, right? And that's kind of, you're walking out of the office and you're having a 30-second conversation, or you see something that's wrong, and straight away it's these little conversations along the way that you're doing that is really helpful, and it's correcting the performance, or letting people know that expectations aren't being met, right? And correcting it early. So who here gets enough feedback in their workplace? Most people, I think when I'd actually like a little bit more feedback, right? And so as leaders, I'd encourage you to give it give more feedback, right? Until you get told to stop is usually my advice in that space. So Mara's saying she could definitely do more as well. Dan's saying coaching leaders regularly need to differentiate discussion on tasks and work versus feedback with goals on changes. Yeah, that can be really, really making that differentiation, slightly different thinking, different approach, different mindset can be beneficial. Cool. So I actually really like this quote from Martin Moore. He's fairly prominent here in Australia in social media, but he says performance reviews add value when they confirm and communicate what every individual in your organization should already know. I'm a big believer, and I've said this many times, that if there is any surprises or negative surprises in a performance review, then that's a failure of leadership, not a failure of performance. If you get to the performance review and you're telling someone that they haven't performed for the first time, then that's on you, right? You haven't had the regular conversations with them to let them know and give them the opportunity to perform. This second one here is around outcome, right? And this is on you to think about, what's the outcome of this conversation that I'm about to have? It's Stephen Covey, beginning with the end in mind. As a result of this conversation, what do I want the outcome to be? Because unless you are clear on what the outcome is, you aren't clear, or you can't be intentional about having the conversation in the way that is required to achieve that outcome. See, if you want to have a performance conversation with an employee that starts the process of performance managing them out of the organization, that's a very different context to, I actually really like this employee, I want to go above and beyond to keep them and make sure that they feel valued and supported. And so you can deal with the same issue, but if you've got two different outcomes, you can have the conversation in two very different ways. So in order to get the best ROI for your conversations, it's being clear about what is the outcome that I want for this conversation. And really, that is, at the end of this conversation, what do I want the person to know? How do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do? Again, this is kind of related to the clarity piece. Unless you can clearly articulate what the outcome is or what you want them to know, feel, and do, you can't be intentional about framing the conversation in a way or having a conversation in a way that allows them to make the conversation successful, right? And so that becomes really important. Really, what this level of preparation does also is it allows you to be confident walking into the conversation, right? And that's a big thing. A lot of people don't do performance-related conversations well because they're not confident they can do it well. The more preparation they do, the more clarity you have, the greater confidence you'll have to therefore engage in the conversation and therefore make it more productive and effective. Peter's saying, I asked for feedback on me and my support as part of my one-on-one. And so again, right? So it's kind of that beginning with the end in mind aspect there as well, Peter, which is great. Then the final one here around getting the best ROI out of your performance conversations is the individualize. And this is where you tailor the conversation to the individual, all right? Individuals are all different. We're all kind of unique. We've got this unique makeup, whether that's personality, experience, value set, the way that we view the world. And so what we as leaders want to do, ultimately, the purpose of a performance conversation is to drive performance, as I said before. So what we want to do is motivate them. We want to engage them. We want to get them to, we want to pull the necessary levers, all right, that is going to get traction with them as an individual to increase their performance. And so this comes back to the more you know about a person, the more levers you have to individualize the conversation, the more levers of motivation you have. Really what we're trying to do here is really inspire this intrinsic motivation, this drive for performance there. And so I will often say, frame the conversation as a contribution to their priorities. What's important to them? Now, there are some people that might be personality based. There are some people that are task oriented, right? They're results driven, and that's just part of their personality makeup. So if that's the case, then frame the contribution, the conversation around how do they achieve results. There's other people that are much more people oriented. Again, personality trait coming through. And so you frame the conversation as to how their current performance, whether high or low, lack of or performing real, is making a contribution to the people. Is it supporting the other people in that space? And so if someone's underperforming, you might say, well, hey, are you aware of the implications on all these other people in your team? And that might get a whole lot more traction as opposed to someone who's more task oriented and results driven, who's like, well, I don't care about the impact on my team. I just want to get the thing done. And so what you want to do is frame the conversation in that way. If someone's, that at the moment there's stuff going on outside and time with family is actually really important to them, then you might frame the conversation in the sense of, hey, if you can do X, Y, and Z and you can meet these expectations, you'll be able to get a little bit more time at home, right? You'll be able to be a bit more flexible, whatever the case may be. All right. Peter, great to have you on board. I appreciate that you do need to dash. And so really what you want to do is motivate and inspire people. And that's different for everybody, right? So if you're doing a one-on-one, in order to make the conversation as effective as possible, have a think about what's important to this person, what is the makeup of this person, and how can I tailor the conversation to them? Because having the same conversation with a bunch of different people is not necessarily going to lead to the same level of success in each of those conversations. And the other thing to think about here, right, is yes, we're talking about individualizing and having individual conversation. This same principle can apply at the team level as well. If you're talking to a team collectively, what are the priorities for that team? What are the common characteristics that they all share? What are the maybe KPIs or considerations, the performance indicators, the measures of success for the team? And then tailor your conversation, individualize your conversation to the team then, and the team's priorities. Again, it's a little bit more preparation. You slow down the front end in terms of your preparation, and then you speed up the effect at the back end, right? You make those conversations more effective. And so there's those three kind of key things. Finally, if I was going to summarize, right, really what you want to focus on with performance conversations is progress over punishment. You want to generate growth over giving a grilling. You want to lay the foundations, right? And we spoke about building trust, making sure that you've got clarity, and making sure you've got commitment and agreement there. And then you want to make sure that you're employing those ROI kind of characteristics or principles there: regularity, outcome, and individualization. And if you want to do all of those, then, and you want to kind of almost add a multiplying effect on that, there's one more bonus thing that you can do, and that's use coaching skills all the way through, right? The more that you can engage people in that space, the better it's going to be. If you think about what are the benefits of coaching, it's around engagement, autonomy, ownership. It's making people more proactive. It's helping people to show more initiative and have greater levels of strategic thinking. You know, coaching approaches increase satisfaction, well-being, meaningfulness at work. And so you can go through this whole process if you're using coaching skills, and you can make it more likely for you to produce all those outcomes whilst having performance, whilst driving performance as well, right? Really, when it comes to performance conversations, at the end of it, you want people to walk away feeling respected, not resentful. All right. They want them to feel supported and valued, not just like a piece of meat that nobody cares about. And if you're doing all of these things, then you are laying the foundation, you're setting the conditions to get the most out of your performance conversations. All right. If this is, really kind of resonating with you, and you're super keen, you're like, hey, Cliff, this is awesome stuff, and I'd love to get a little bit more of it, then, I just wanted to let you know that I have the Leaders to Luminaries coaching program. All this, kind of comes out of that. How do we make leaders luminaries within their organization, people of prominence that really elevate other people's performance, that create environments that are empowering for people, right? And so if that's of interest to you, then just put luminary in the chat. I'd love to have a conversation with you about what that program looks like. But finally, that's kind of it, guys. I hope that's been valuable for you. Please let me know what's been most valuable for you. Put it in the chat. And if you've got any questions, we've got about 5 minutes left before the 1 hour mark is up. I'd love to answer any questions that you have. So, all right, the other Sarah is saying, love the concept of individualizing the conversations. Doing DISC profiles with the team. Yes, that DISC is great, right? Because it gives you a common language amongst the team with which to talk about the priorities that you have, the personality differences, the strengths that you bring, right? And so once you're aware of those as a leader and a manager, what you can do is leverage those when it comes to having performance conversations, which is great. I do a lot of work with different teams using DISC and a couple of other team profiling tools as well. It really can be beneficial. So what we might do is we'll close the formal proceedings here. Thank you very much for joining us. All right. I'll catch you guys later. Thank you very much again for joining us. See you later.